Hi, everybody. Wow, I didn't expect so many people to be here. How much is it?
How many people are we? 100?
About 140.
Holy shit.
Let me get a little bit comfortable.
By all means.
Hoyte, give it to me if you want.
Bueno, antes de empezar, solo deciros que, bueno, no hace falta presentarle, todos sabemos quién es. ¿Esto funciona ahora mismo? Sí, vale, no me oigo a mí mismo. Supongo que todos sabéis quién es, no hace falta presentación. Muchos le asociáis directamente con las últimas películas que ha hecho con Christoper Nolan, pero recuerdo que ha trabajado con Spike Jonze, con James Gray, con Thomas Alfredson. Y bueno, ahora os explicará Joel cómo va a ser la dinámica y vamos a disfrutar de esta charla. I hope enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I ask who speaks English? My Spanish is very, very bad. Who doesn't speak English? No, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but are we just going to talk without translating, or?
Well, if anyone has any questions that they don't feel comfortable asking in English, of course I can translate the question to Hoyte, but in principle everyone will understand what you explain.
Yeah, as well as personally, I don't mind people asking stuff if they feel inclined to ask or shout or whatever. I had so many like super formal conversations and Q&As in front of the group. So for me, it's much nicer if you use your own time as a student or as a curious person, and keep it a little loose.
Exactly. Just in case, I have prepared some questions, just in case at some point it runs a little bit dry. But in principle, the idea is to have a dynamic conversation involving everyone here. So if you have any questions at any moment, or something we say sparks one in your mind, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get you a mic and you can ask your questions as often as you like.
And I also want to say, I mean, there's my picture here, I see, but I just want to introduce this man here. This is B.Davis. He's been with me since Her. He is known as the best first AC focus puller in the industry. Whatever I have been able to achieve is all because of being able to work together with people like Keith. He's extremely accomplished, professional who knows a lot about all the stuff that you probably will be very curious about. So happy you're here, Keith.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you both for being here and sharing this time with us and your knowledge. I'm sure everyone's very excited. I am. I'd like to congratulate you too, gefeliciteerd, with your first Oscar.
Thank you.
Also, let me just say thank you also for the fact that the first words you uttered when receiving your Oscar were to motivate a new generation. Well, consider us motivated.
Yeah, I have to make a small little correction. It was not necessary to motivate only the new generation, but also the older generation. It was very important. I just think it's important to keep pushing for it, because we need to keep having the choice of different media and different stuff, and so I think it's just important to. It was for me. It was just important to mention, to remind that we just have to try at least, if we can.
Couldn't agree more. I'm a little bit nervous. I've done this once before, but just letting you guys know. So let's kick it off with the first question. Usually on our first year, when we start here, our teacher asks us an interesting memory-based question. I thought we'd kick it off with that. So. I'll ask you both. What is the first film you ever remember seeing in a cinema? He's the responsible guy for that question.
Shall I start? Where are you?
I need a moment to think about this.
I grew up in the countryside, so I didn't have like cinema very close by. So the cinema that I've seen was kind of. I remember Bud Spencer, Terence Hill. I don't know if you guys ever seen the Bud Spencer and Terence Hill movies. Working 9 to 5, E.T. You know, it was a very eclectic thing because when my parents took us to the cinema, it was like sort of they suddenly felt like, okay, les uns et les autres, French film. It wasn't very much like, oh, now there's a cinema event, or now we got 2001, or now Kubrick came out with a new film. It was much more random than that. I think the most sort of cinematic experiences I lived through as a kid came from television. A thing that I remember very vividly is the retrospect. We had on I think it was Wednesday nights. There was the sort of the more cultural television channel, VPRO, in the evening, and they did a Nicholas Roeg retrospect. And I remember seeing like 4 Nicholas Roeg films in 4 weeks, and I was way too young to sort of understand them. You know, it was a film called Eureka, a film called Track 29, The Insignificance, all with Teresa Russell and Nick Roeg. He used to be a cinematographer before he started directing. And I just remember very vaguely, and I don't know if I'm romanticized that a little bit afterwards, but I just remember that, suddenly there is some sort of awareness that grows that images are part of storytelling. The idea that by doing things a certain way and seeing certain things in a certain light have influence on, how you experience the film. Much later age, I of course started to intellectualize it and to explain it. But I just remember feeling that filmmaking it's pictures and it's music and with that it's moods. And I remember that very vividly from watching Nick Roeg pictures. There you go.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the movies, and when I first became conscious of movies in the theaters, I just realized that I saw a lot of movies when I was really young. But I think when I first became conscious was Star Wars or Jaws, and I remember. I can't think about chronologically when these movies came out. Like my parents took me. I shouldn't have been in the theater, but my dad took me to see Shaft, Electric Gliding Blue. It's a Robert Blake movie. It's a lot of inappropriate movies, I guess, at that age because I was only 7 or 8. But being able to see the movies in the theater, I remember seeing Rocky in the theater, and that experience, and then having the crowd just go crazy. It was like being at an arena and watching it live, but it was just so magical. And so I guess those are the memories.
But the inappropriate movies. This is a very good way to sort of get into movies. Because I remember that. I got to see a lot of like Nouvelle Vague cinema, French cinema in Dutch television. And as a kid, the only reason we wanted to watch them was because there's a lot of, naked and stuff going on there.
Well, in America in the 70s, it was like there was always like, the movies. There was always like just one little bit of nudity, and it was just like as a kid, you're like kind of like, ooh, and there it is, and and so, but it's things change, and I think for the better. But that was a part of like
Amazing that you have to sit like sit through like 3 hours of art house movies to just see one tit.
Or just open up a National Geographic.
All right. Well, while we're on the subject, while we don't have any hands coming up, what about some of your favorites? Do you have any films that you think aspiring people, aspiring DPs or people in the industry should see whilst on their way, or movies that inspired you specifically?
I mean, your sort of top 10 list almost changes, by the hour or weekly,
Tell me about it.
I think making films or cinematography is super dynamic, and you try in a way not to make one film to be exactly the same as the previous film, and you try to sort of get inspired by new stuff, and but there are some films that keep haunting you or keep following you closely throughout your career for very different reasons, and a lot of it has very much for me to do about approach or cinematic approach, or films that really succeeded for me, in speaking the language the right way, We just talked before we got here. We talked about the Swedish film, A Swedish Love Story, which is still one of my big favorites, and I come back to very often. And it has very much a tone, mood kind of thing. One thing that I really love in that film is the restraint with what the story is told. The way that the filmmakers Roy Andersson or Jens Fischer is, but I also have to return once in a while to, Tarkovsky's Mirror is a film that keeps following me. It's stuff that Robbie Mueller did, I love also, the old American cinema. I love Heaven's Gate. Cimino film is one of my favorite films, or, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and all these films, they come back to you, and suddenly I have a period where it's all about Cassavetes or but then there's a lot of new stuff that suddenly makes itself to the top. It's a very dynamic list, and I also kind of think there's a point in keeping that list dynamic. It's almost like when you have your favorite film, maybe you should just forget about it for a little bit and find yourself another favorite film. There's something healthy with that, I think.
Yeah, good advice. What about you, Keith? Any films that particularly inspired or marked you along the way?
Like I used to own a copy of Platoon. And I used to love watching. I love Bob Richardson, and I just love the way he lit his movies, and Oliver Stone, and I'd watch this movie over and over and over. And I remember somebody was asking me about Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, and I was like, those movies are great, but like I was like, Platoon is the best for me because. Charlie Sheen, his character just kind of spoke to me. It was kind of like, you're trying to navigate through life, and you have two leaders, and one is a little bit more reckless, and one is a little bit more compassionate. And so, you're learning about manhood and life, and, and there's different ways to learn it. And so it kind of spoke to me. And then years later, I decided I wanted to watch Full Metal Jacket again, and I watched that and I was blown away. And I realized, the directing style and the way it was shot, and the acting, and just just the whole movie, it resonated more to me. Not really resonated more, but it was more. I can understand, like, you know, it's an anti-war film to me, and I just got more out of it by rewatching it, and you know, there's so many different films. First Blood, I went back and I watched that, and it's just that movie. You know, if you look at Stallone's career, you know, and some people like, oh, he's not that great of an actor, but it's, you know, he was a writer, director, actor, true filmmaker, and you can really see his range in that movie, even though that was one of his first ones. But there are so many different films, and you know, I agree with Hoyte. It's like, you know, there's really like not one like my favorite movie. Like I used to love Shawshank Redemption, you know, and that was like one of my favorite movies for a long time. And but there's, for me to, like, if I had to go to a desert island and pick one movie, I couldn't do it, you know.
Couldn't agree more.
It's also it's a very it's in a way a weird question because it's, I think that a lot of your liking towards specific things is just very personal in a way that, you know, why certain things apply to you has everything to do with your own memories or the moment you saw it, or, you know, things that happened in your life. You know, it's something else than to ask objectively, like, what is a good movie, you know, or why is that a good movie, or why is that shot. But like, if you ask somebody for your favorites, you know, you know, the reason why something can be so close to you has very often nothing to do with technology, or, you know, it has purely to do with some sort of personal connection, you know.
Yeah, it's like Keith said, sometimes you'll have a favorite and then you watch another one and it resonates more with you because of that moment in your life, what you're going through or whatever.
Well, like when I first went off to college, and I remember, you know, they had my freshman year in college, we had these movie nights, and it was more like socialization and getting people together. And I remember this film that I always remember, and it's weird because there's this whole 6 degrees of separation thing that happens right now, is it was To Live and Die in L.A., and it was shot by Robbie Mueller, which is one of his mentors. So it was like, that was a pivotal moment in my, as a film viewer, like being conscious of a story and the way it was shot. And then another film a few days later was Empire of the Sun, and that was, you know, being able to, you know, to truly be conscious of, you know, you think about staging, and, you know, a film that's, I guess, it's kind of like, you know, he's alone most of the time, and it's, you know, there's such solitude, and then it's such a big film, and it's like the grand staging, and it's like, you know, Steven Spielberg at his best with, you know, staging shots and scenes, you know. So, but I lost my track. But you know, but like, it's like, you know, to me, it's like when I read a book, it's watching a movie is the same. It takes me on a journey, and, you know, and it is about experiences, and it's about, you know, like my memories, and like being connected to a certain film at a certain time, you know, is, I guess, what we're kind of talking about.
Brilliant, thank you. Any questions up to this point? I can keep going, but here we go. There's a question. Over
Yes.
Hello. The question is for both of you. How do you know you want to be a cinematographer and a first AC? How do you discover you want to be a cinematographer in your life and a first AC?
I mean, when you grow up and you're, you know, your early teens, you don't really know what cinematography is. You still have to learn about filmmaking. but what I said about Nick Roque, to understand that there are languages, or there is ways, there is influences that you can assert on a thing in order to make it work. You know, you get aware of that, and then later, you know, you become a little bit interested in films, but you don't know, you know, what a cinematographer is, or a clapper loader, or the first AC, or a director. You don't know where one person's jurisdiction stops and the other one starts, you know. And then you sort of grow up and you start to read a little bit about it. And then in my case, I did entrance exam in the Dutch film school, and I did it when I was 17, I think, for the first time. With all my enthusiasm, I told them I want to make movies, and what do you want to do? I want to direct or whatever. I failed, and I did not get accepted in a film school. And then I was working for a year and sort of being frustrated, and but at the same time I just stayed put, and I knew that I wanted to do something in filmmaking. And then after a year I made a lot of photos, and I learned to photograph a little bit, so I got a little bit more experience. I went back and did entrance exam again at the Dutch film school, and they rejected me again, so at that moment, at some point, after a year of doing more work, my brother and we went on a trip to Poland. And Poland, it was 1992 or something. Poland was just opened up, It used to be far behind the Iron Curtain, but it just opened up. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should have a look at the Polish film school." And we went together at the Polish film school. and I sort of opted possibly, what about doing entrance exam here? And they said, yeah, you should definitely do it, but what do you want? We have two directions here. And they said one direction is directing, and the other direction is cinematography. And I just remember that I was sort of about to say, like, well, I want, and sort of stopping there and going back to our hotel in the evening. I was really thinking about it a lot, and I just sort of had to understand, and I had to learn that my affinity when I look films was always so much image related, and it was always so much had to do with moods and with light, as well as I really wanted to learn something, I wanted to learn a craft, something to put your teeth in a very sort of practical sense. And so the next morning I came back and I told them that I wanted to study cinematography, and that's kind of where the love story started. It's before that it was much more abstract, and it was a kind of, movies. I'd like to do something in the film, and I like to be part of this. And after that, it became much more. It got a much more clear direction. It was really about. Okay, now you study cinematography. Now you learn your tools. You start to understand everything of that profession. Understand what you can do. And you enrich and you develop and you widen and you broaden. And, today I have a very different understanding of what a cinematographer is than when I started, So I guess the answer is you kind of sink into it, For me, it was at least like that.
For me, like, as college, I didn't even know, like I went to school for graphic design photography. Like I wanted to be a photographer. When I grew up in a very small town, very humble means. I remember being a small child, and we had an outhouse because my dad was building the house, and there was no running water. We had a spring, and I remember getting up in the morning, and you have to go get the water out of the spring to heat it up to, and then you pour it in a big tub and you took your bath, So as a young child, I always took mental photographs, and I always that was, the one thing. I'd look at a certain thing and I would snap a photograph of my head and I would store this, and I, basically, it was, I'd have all these little photographic memories, and I remember my sister, she had a Polaroid camera, and like my parents had a 110 camera, but I didn't really mess around too much with that, but the Polaroid really sung to me because she was working, and, after the fact that, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, but like I remember my father hooking up the water, and I remember flushing the toilet for the first time, and it was like that image, and it's like I have like these photographs of toilets, in my repertoire, because for some reason it's always connected to me, to my childhood, and so but like as my parents worked hard and made more money, and we had more things, we had running water, and my sister, she would come home from college because she was studying nursing, but she had this Polaroid camera, and I remember grabbing this thing, and because she was 10 years older than me, and I'd grab this thing and I would burn up all her film, and I would just shoot all this stuff, and she'd be upset with me, and then but I'd always remember the camera, and I've always been intrigued by the camera, and so as I got older and I went off to university, my dream was to be a photographer, go travel the world and take beautiful photographs, and then but I didn't really want that as my 9-to-5 job, but I was always interested in magazines, and I loved photo magazines. I was into BMX, which is kind of like skateboarding, and there was a magazine called Trans World Skateboarding, and I just loved the way that the photographs looked, and but then I also wanted to make magazines, and so if I went to school to become a graphic designer, I could design magazines, I could take some photographs, and at the time, and here's another 6 degrees of separation. At that time, one of my good friends, his parents were divorced, and his mother lived in Maryland, his father lived in Virginia, and he would go up and spend time in Maryland. And one of his good friends was this young gentleman named Adam Spiegel, who the world knows as Spike Jonze. And so it's really weird because Spike was doing the things that I wanted to do, and so years later, I'm getting off track a little bit, but like years later, I moved to Los Angeles. A good friend of mine is working on this film called Adaptation, and so we're doing pickup shoots, and I see Spike. I'd say, hey, Spike, talk about my friend, his friend, and we kind of like, we had commonality. And then years later, we do this thing called Invisible Skateboards for this skateboard company called Girl Skateboards, which is Yeah Right. And then years later, I meet Hoyte on a movie directed by Spike Jonze, and that's how we kind of met. No, what was the question? Sorry, I'm just
Drink more coffee.
No. I could talk all day. Like extremely shy, but like I can talk all day about this.
Well, I think the question was kind of related to when
Oh,
how you knew you wanted to do film.
Oh, so how I got into focus pulling was, I was finished college, university, and I was trying to live as an artist. I was working for a still photographer from New York. He would come down and shoot these magazine spreads, and I would be a second assistant. I would load the Hasselblad and hold the bounce cards and stuff for the models. And so after that, I was didn't have a job, and my friend, one of my roommates, he was a professional stand-in. he kind of looks like John Cusack, and there was a John Cusack film in town a few years ago and before this, and he was a stand-in for John Cusack. So he did a good job, and so he was the stand-in for any film that came to Richmond, Virginia. And so that summer in '91, there was a mini-series called A Woman Named Jackie, and he was standing in for Stephen Collins. And hold on, I'm getting there. So I'm making this thing last. First day on set, I get hired to put the layout board on the floor. And the first day on the set, I walk on the set and I see all these hot lights, and I was blown away because in college I worked with strobes, and we never really worked with hot lights. And I went up to this gentleman who was 6'5", and I asked him, I was like, "What is that?" And he goes, "This is a scrim." And he told me what it was about, the nets and how, what it was used for. And that gentleman was the late Skip Cook, and he was the key grip. And if it wasn't for him, I would never be right here. And so I was blown away by his knowledge and how easy it was for him to talk to me and tell me about all this stuff. And so I, ignorant as I was, I said, if you ever see me sitting around doing nothing, let me know. I'll you need a hand, just let me know. And so throughout the shoot, he would go to the truck and get me a Mayfair. And I would bust ass as fast as I could to the truck, bring it back, and he goes, "Okay, that's good, take it back." And so he kind of did that with the whole truck. So I knew all the grip equipment, and the last 4 weeks of the show, he hired me as one of his grips. And so at the end of the show, this is where it becomes how I got into camera assisting. At the end of the show, I'm at the wrap party, and I'm talking to the director and the DP. Larry Pierce was the director. Michael Fash was the cameraman. And they said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I was like, "I want to be a photographer." And they said, "You should have told us. We could have got you in the camera department." And at that time, it was the DP operated, the first assistant, and the second assistant loaded. And this is like a big production. So it was only 3 people in the camera department. And they said, "We could have got you in the camera department." And I was like, "No way, it's that easy." And so the food was good. The people, we partied great. We had a great time. And so they said, "Never be afraid to tell people what you want to do." And with that, I ran with it. I moved out to Los Angeles, and I was like, "I want to become a camera assistant." And so I made these little black cards with silver ink because of my graphic design background. I made these cards that went to an answer machine because we didn't have cell phones, or I think that was before pagers. So, and I just passed these out to 1,000,003 people. If you had a crew jacket on, or you had a hat on, if you were working on the side of the road with the camera, I passed it out. I was just like, and in hindsight, I couldn't believe that I was doing this because I'm a very shy person, but this is what I wanted. And slowly, and I just kind of get a little bit more traction. And my name is so common. If you look in the LA phone book, there's like 1,000,003 Keith Davises, so it had a certain familiarity to people. So people, even if they didn't know me, they sounded like they knew me, So I would get a little job here, get a job there, and then I just kept working hard, and here I am. Yeah.
Here he is.
Yeah.
Shy people, it's possible.
Yeah.
Any other questions popping up, or should I go on? Oh, there we go. Question over there. Don't sit down.
Hi. Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask a question to Hoyte. So when you use projections on your movies, how did you come up with that idea of using projections? And do you think that LED screens are going to help you out with those? Like, for example, in Oppenheimer, the distortion that you use and all this stuff. And do you think it's going to be replaced by LED screens by any chance?
It totally can be replaced by LED screens. You know, the only problem with, well, by the way, when we project on screens, we also do it digitally. You know, we're not using film projectors to project it. You know, you always have to be a little bit mindful about, you know, a lot of technical things like, you know, moire or interference or noise, all those kind of things. But I think LEDs is a very good tool in order to do back projection. The reason why we do back projection has very much to do with the fact that we like to do a lot of stuff in camera. You know, we'd like to see the results and we'd like to develop the film and then project the film and see what we're getting. And one of the main reasons that we like to do that is when we shoot on the big formats that we shoot, like IMAX, for instance. Every time you have to scan that film back, you know, every time you want to do a CGI or a visual effects, you have to scan a piece of negative that effectively has a resolution of 18K or something, you know, it can capture that. But the moment you go digitally, you lose already half of that information. As well as it's impossible to have a workflow in a film that is so high resolution. So in that way, we try to do it in camera and so that we can just preserve as much as possible of the original resolution. And that's why we very often resort in those things as projection. Yeah, but LED. I mean, we work a lot with LED screens nowadays. For instance, in car commercials or, you know, interior cars with backgrounds floating by. You know, in the old days you would sit on trailers, etc., etc. But now we can emulate it very nicely with projections. And if it's now an LED screen or if it's a digital projector. The only thing is you have to always make sure that whatever is projected is kind of good, you know. You have to put a lot of energy and a lot of resources on the post effectively that usually would do the things later, now has to put resources on doing things earlier in order to get them there.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. You often talk about the blend between artistic expression and technical precision. So yeah, you know, you mentioned that something you like about your job is that you have to reach far into the opposite corners of your brain at the same time to push things forward. So can you think of any moments where this was particularly difficult, or perhaps even had to let go of one of those two things a little bit more to get it forward?
Yeah, I mean, everything always starts with a script, right? And a couple of dry words on a script. And as you read those words, you know, somebody is throwing sort of an idea at you. And as that happens, and as you read that, you start to form images in your own head. You know, that's kind of unstoppable, especially for a person that is a little bit visually inclined. So very often, you know, with that idea in mind that you need to film things the way they are, to keep them in camera, you at the same time as you read a word, you dream up some sort of poetic vision, and at the same time, you know, oh fuck, I can't do this because this is technically impossible, or I have no idea how to do this. So that's always when, you know, one end of your brain, which is really dreaming up visuals and images, as well as, you know, your technical mind, your body that straight away resists you and knows that things are impossible, but also starts to work and starts triggering itself. And that's very often where these kind of things meet for me. You know, it's poetry and concept and ideas, and then technical limitations that you have to overcome. So usually my engineering brain kicks in, you know. I want to build stuff and I want to invent stuff in order to make things possible that I'm going to need portray those visions or those visuals. And very often, my prep is very much some sort of a symbiosis or some sort of a co-work between those two outer elements. And the other way around as well. You sometimes you come up with things or devices or weird lenses or weird filters that you put in front of the camera, and from a pure sort of technical idea or the knowledge that a lot of things is possible, you start to come up with a lot of other ideas that float out of that. So it is very much some sort of a how do you call it? How you call it? An exchange of different disciplines that both can be very productive to each other. Does that make sense? I don't know. Maybe it's fake.
Made sense to me.
I'm just curious about this group. Let's show some hands about who knew from, like, say, the age of 12, 13 already exactly what they were going to do. Who had the feeling that by the age of like 17 or 18 knew exactly what cinematography meant, what it is, what it does?
I think
That's
we might
so
still
cool.
be figuring out.
No.
I think we still might be figuring that out.
yeah, but I think that's coming back to the previous question. I think that's a very interesting point. Truth is, I'm also still figuring it out. What you can do and what you can't do, and where your job stops, and really what your job means. And you every time, every step on the way, you figure out things to put more power behind your language and behind what you're doing. And that can be technology, as we're talking about, ideas, but it's also psychology or philosophy or shrinking. You sometimes you have to be a shrink to a director, and by you having that capability, suddenly you unlock ideas in that person that really help you, fulfilling a sort of visual idea. I just wanted to mention that.
Brilliant, thank you. Any further questions? I can always continue. There we are. There's one over there.
Hi. I would like to know if there's what's your favorite part for both of you of your work, and what's your least favorite part?
I deeply love the feeling that whatever you do with a group of people. It's the result is so much dependent on the energy and the chemistry between a group of people. You don't do it alone. I also I don't believe that you can make a good film just in a glass cubicle and in a room, conceptualizing it. I think if you're dealing with feelings and emotions, it all comes down very much to moments on the set that you're having, and chemistry you have with the people you have on the set, your openness to incorporate the light that is available, but also incorporate the mood of your actors or the weather, So I always think that you have to stay very flexible, and that also forces your group to be flexible. So your work becomes very much about setting those parameters, And when that works, and when you do some magical things on set with that group, there's nothing more beautiful about that. And the parts where it's not fun and where it's not nice is when it doesn't work, and that happens also every single film shoot. You lock up, That means you have been conceptualizing it. You have been looking at thousands of photographic references. You have a storyboard, and you know exactly how this film is going to be. You put an actor there, and you know exactly where you're going to put the camera, and you start moving your camera, and the actors start acting, and chemistry just doesn't happen. It's just something wrong, and you don't really know what it is, and it's super frustrating. because you just know that you're about to commit something to film that is just not good. It doesn't sit right in your heart or in your stomach. And then very often, you're frustrated, you're cursing, your director is frustrated, your crew wants to go to lunch, they're tired of you being all bad-tempered and so on. And there's these moments where you say, okay, time out, let's just relax for a moment, let's just step back, everybody off the set, let's rethink this. Let's figure out, why is this not flying? Why is this not magic? Why? Where does it stop? And what's not good about it? And then you're figuring it out. And from all these elements that you have been thinking out before, the complicated camera move, the light, you go back to the core and you keep things simple. You say, you know what? Maybe we're just, running ahead of ourselves. Maybe we should just look at this more simple. And you come with a very simple solution that is very elegant, that is totally the opposite. And then after lunch, you start working on that. And suddenly you feel that magic is coming back to you, and the good things are happening. And everybody feels, okay, now we're clicking into the right rhythm, all of us. And when that happens, you can end up at, being able to create something truly magic again. It's very, very, very interesting how, in my case, of course, how this is so dependent on group chemistry, so much more than just your own sort of ideas or so much more about what you have prepared or what you think that things have to be. Sometimes the set and the people around on the set and the weather and the elements, they have to tell you what it should be, instead of you telling what it should be. And that's for me always very magic and very humbling.
Beautiful. Do you have any things you would say you dislike and like about your job?
Well, for me, like I love I love puzzles, and I feel that on set, I don't think that there are problems to solve. I just feel like that there's a lot of solution opportunities, and a lot of times I'm in a situation where I have to, how am I going to figure this out? And so I enjoy that process. What Hoyte was talking about, I think that I thrive in those situations. Like the negatives is like when it's over thought out and it's over scrutinized and micromanaged to the point where you lose the emotion, the connectedness of people. And it's like we work with a great. We've been on a good run of directors and people who really understand the jobs and the crafts and the different arts that come together. And so there's an understanding of what needs to be done. But I think that there's times where it's not with these people, but like with and just going to other productions and working with people who. It's like you have one person who's like, oh, this singular version of vision, and this is mine, and they bark and they tell people what to do, and and it's like they're unrealistic expectations of people and not understanding. Oh, it's like you want to change this angle, but it's like it's going to take 35 minutes to do that, but they want it done right then. So that's the frustrating part. But I think that doesn't work. That doesn't happen in our pool of people. It's but it happens in the world.
Thank you. I think we had another question in the back. Yeah, there we go.
Hello. I just had a quick question for Hoyte. I listened a while ago an interview you did for Doubly, and you were talking about how what was really difficult in filming all your movies wasn't the big moments, like, for example, Oppenheimer, the bomb, and I just wanted, but what was really difficult was the conversation between actors and how you film it. So I just wanted to ask if you could take us to your creative process or your pre-production and tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, the most difficult thing is kind of it's to keep working on a cohesive film. You know, every moment in a film, every scene you do is related to the previous scene, and I think that the power of your work as a cinematographer is not only, you know, what you can bring to the table in terms of light or story, but what you also have to understand, it's all about projection, you know. It's like you can look at a close-up, but that close-up has a very different meaning if that comes after a specific sequence, or, you know, a close-up has a different meaning if it's 3 close-ups in a row, or a close-up, a wide shot and a close-up. You know, darkness has no meaning if it doesn't come behind brightness, or, you know, vice versa. And I think, you know, to see a film as a cohesive sort of one piece, that's very, very tricky. You know, when you talk about action sequences or things, you know, like in Oppenheimer, you know, the action sequences are relatively simple because, you know, they're technical challenges, and you know, very often those technical and practical challenges, they you know, you can really attack them with a sort of hands-onness, etc., etc. But because I remember having said something like that, that I said very much, for me, what was very much a challenge, you make a 3-hour film where people effectively talk to each other in small rooms, and to keep the attention of your audience during all that time, that's your biggest challenge as a cinematographer. You know, that's where you really have to challenge yourself, and you really have to figure out every time when you shoot the most simple close-up, you have to understand kind of what you're doing, you know what I mean? It's because that's where I think your film can really fall apart as well. We were talking, I think in that interview, we were talking very much about that last shot in the film, right? There's, I don't know, did everybody see Oppenheimer, or did... it ends up on his close-up, and the question was, oh, but that close-up was very powerful. How did you do it? What did you do as a cinematographer to make that close-up really more powerful than a lot of the other close-ups? And, you know, it sort of flabbergasted me, or it's sort of like, okay, what did I do as a cinematographer there to do that? And I didn't really know. You know, I couldn't really concretely answer that. I said, well, maybe we use some wider lenses there, so we got a little closer. It's a quite tight eye line. We go in closely. I made sure that with bounces, his light was, or his face is slightly and naturally bright. And I put all these things together and thinking, okay, so now you have that close-up that is worth it for the end of the film. But then I realized something else, and that is, the power of that close-up is not necessarily what I brought to the table there, but it's also, again, it's the power of projection. It is to look in somebody's face at that specific way after you have lived through everything as an audience before. That's what gives it power, and that's what makes it very special as well. And so when you are photographing that last close-up, it's very important that you have that awareness, you know, because then you can also do the opposite. Instead of like giving everything you have in your arsenal to put in that close-up, you can also work with restraint. You can take things away. You can, you know, step off the gas a little bit. But again, it's the power of projection. It's the whole of the film that will make those individual elements zing, for instance. And I find that always very challenging, because that means that you have to have your head all the time in editing or in rhythm, you know. The rhythm of a film is a very specific thing, you know. And for me, it's cinematography is always much less about painting with light, as people call it, or for me, it's much more musical understanding, you know. It's much more what Tarkovsky said, it's sculpting in time. It's rhythm, and it's where do you put your guitar solo, you know? Are you throwing your guitar solo throughout the whole song, or do you Do you move it to specific places, like a symphony? You know, the way that symphonies are constructed, they have a very specific narrative to them, and I think that awareness is in cinematography is very important.
There you go. Let me just ask one quick question, because just on the topic of visual cohesion, how do you collaborate with other departments such as costume and production design to ensure this visual cohesion in a film? I mean, those two departments have to be best buds for things to work. So, take us through your process that well.
That's an interesting question. By the way, you have to work with production design department, and costume, of course. But more important is, what is visual cohesion, right? Is that everything has the same color? Or is that if everything is shot with the same lens? Or is it that everything looks blue or that everything looks yellow? I don't think so, you know. I always get irritated when I see films that are, you know, stubbornly visual cohesive. Like somewhere in a room aside, some people think up that, oh, conceptually this whole film has to be yellow because yellow is this color has this and this meaning for us, and it's great if the whole film looks yellow, and then everything looks exactly the same. And in my own work, I always find that a little bit. Banal or pedestrian, because it doesn't really serve a single purpose apart from fulfilling some sort of conceptual thought that you had about it. And you know, we're talking about emotions over time here, and we're talking about shooting real life, and so sometimes that visual cohesion, so to say, is not something that has to come out of a color or a set of colors or anything, but it has to come out of some sort of a philosophy or an idea. And so sometimes things don't look necessarily the same, but they're done with the same sort of idea or the same sort of mindset, and that will bring the visual cohesion. And it's not so obvious, you know, it's not as obvious as creating a look or saying we do everything on the 35mm lens, all those kind of things. I think for me, more and more in my career, sort of visual cohesion has become very much about not making things look the same, but trying to sort of, do things that feel very right with your idea about looking at the world, the feeling of proximity of an audience towards the seeing the subjects in the screen, you know, the closeness that you sometimes feel and the distance that you can sometimes feel, you know, a very careful sort of game in which you step on the gas, you step off the gas, and sort of, you know, the fact that things are all shot with the same lens or have all, the special, post-treatment on it and so on. These kind of things, they're not so important anymore to me, you know. More and more, I just like to shoot on real negative, make analog prints, and those analog prints, they are always a little rough, you know. They never, you don't have the power that you have, for instance, like a DI, in which you can add contrast and reduce contrast and work selectively with colors, and you know, you can really sit at a table and match everything very perfectly together, and in the end you come with a stream, a film that kind of looks all very smooth and sleek and nice. But if you do an analog print, which you will see for the people that go tonight to see the print on 70mm or Oppenheimer or Dunkirk or something, these are literally contact prints from the original negative. So when, because of a situation, you end up with a little bit lower contrast, there's no way to raise your contrast, for instance. So all these kind of different moments, they're all baked into the end result. And it's a less neat way of doing it, but it's also, for me, it's a little bit more truthful way to do it, you know. I just feel I became a little bit less, less anal about cohesiveness, so to say, you know.
All right, but just before he wants to ask a question, I want to remind everyone that if you don't know how to ask the question in English, I can't translate it. So if questions in Spanish, go ahead as well.
I love the dialogue, by the way. You know, that's please open up.
Yeah, I want to ask you about how do you work with your gaffer and what do you expect from them?
Well, my little team, which Keith is at the forefront of it, but then my gaffer Adam Chambers, and my key grip. By the way, key grip and gaffer in a US system, they're very, very, very important both. Because the gaffer is doing the lights, but the key grip is the one that cuts the lights with, So a key grip is also, as a gaffer, very much into sort of the visual nitty gritty of what you're doing. But I think we've been together so long time. We have developed a very sort of intuitive relationship. He knows very much what I like, and also my style has become much more simple. I more and more started to sort of removing the lights from the set, use windows, scout rightly. I'm more and more like a more holistic approach about lighting. It's not so much about micromanagement, but it has become much more about, for me, I always call it like charcoal, a drawing in charcoal, right? When you paint in oil paint, it's very much you're molding details. But when we're working, it's so much about flow. So we work much rougher in a way, more holistic. So if I can use one light source to get approximately to the right feeling, I will always choose a more holistic and a more broad stroke opportunity, because I think it keeps flow going. People can move around in an environment, which I think is important. So you're not so much lighting scenes, you're lighting sets effectively. And by, turning around in sets, you get very different dynamics and different light situations. And I think my gaffer is very much into this as well. It's you walk into a room and you analyze the room and you think, how can we light this so that we can keep sort of moving around and so on? What makes sense? And it has become less, through the years, the conversation is much less about what you're doing or what you're exactly going to do. The conversation is much more about all kind of other things, like friends, or like, and sometimes you tell a little bit about, this and this and this, and I would like to do that, and let's try to do that, and then you get to hang for the rest of the day and have a nice time, during the day. But it's important to have people around you that you have some sort of an intuitive understanding with, If you have an intuitive understanding with the people around you, then you can talk about real important things like, what's for lunch, and how's your wife, and how are your kids,
Hello, how are you? First of all, that's the first question, very important. So my question is, it's like for both of you guys. Did you ever had this intrusive thought, especially like in the beginning, that maybe you're not good enough? Because it's a feeling that I don't know if I'm the only one that I'm having it, but it will help me out if somebody like you told me that it does get better or it does get worse.
It gets better and worse at the same time. It's a little bit of a fake answer, but for most of my career, I felt that I'm cheating myself into this or bluffing myself into this, right? I have kind of made my point out of that. I go to the set and I tell people that I don't really know what I'm doing. What's important with that is that, you very often work with directors that also don't really know what they're doing. And that's not a bad thing, Ideas are very, 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 very fragile things. You know, if you see idea as a little seed with a little plant growing out of it, right? It's very, very easy to just trample over it. So you have to approach it with care. And I think the best care that you can give to an idea is to tell, I don't know what to do with you, but I'm going to be very careful and very respectful with you. And very often when you have a very good working relationship with a director, that means that a director can come to you and he can say, I have this hunch, I have this feeling that it has to be, and it can be a super vague feeling or a super vague hunch. If you're a DP that knows exactly what he's going to do and you tell that director, you know what, I don't think it's a good idea, we should do it like that and that and that, and I should light it here and then it'll all be red and then the shots will be like that, it will be good. As you do that idea, you just right away trample to death, you know? So in a way, to go to a set and have that mentality that you don't know what it is that you exactly want, you have in your backbone and in the back of your head, you have months of preparation, you have seen thousands of photo books, you have shared references, both film-wise, photo-wise, and now you have a new problem and you have to make something beautiful out of it. I think that humble mentality and not knowing what it exactly is that you're going to do, but to feel some sort of sincerity towards tackling that problem, that's very important, you know? I think the worst thing for me is to work with a director, for instance, that from day one pretends to me that they know exactly what they want. You know, what's the point? I think it was Picasso that said, if you know exactly what you're going to do, what's even the point of doing it? You know, and so there is something very, very, very important with not knowing what you're going to do. I think. I think it's very important to sort of know your sincerity, do all the prep you can do, but then have some sort of humbleness towards your subject matter, you know, be open and be a real human being that a director can speak to, you know. I mean, it's in social context is exactly the same, you know. If you hang out, go out with somebody and that person always has the answer to everything, there's nothing more annoying to hang with those people, you know. But if you're hanging out with a person that is always curious, doesn't pretend at all that they know everything, you always get to interesting conversations. Does that make sense?
Keith, do you ever feel like you're not good enough?
Yeah, you have to always know exactly what to do, otherwise I'm screwed.
Otherwise you're fired.
No, like, you know, the one good thing, like technically, like, you know, the good thing about going to an institution or learning foundations, you know, basic principle of lighting, exposure, camera speed, all that technical stuff, that's foundation, and that's going to be consistent throughout, you know. So once you have that knowledge, that base, like it's like learning notes of a music. It's like, you know, once you know the notes, you can play whatever, you know. But it's you know, like my job encompasses a lot of stuff. It's like technical, it's like psychologists, there's like, you know, it's almost kind of like being a professional caddy in a way. It's like when, you know, he wants a certain thing, you know, I have to, here it is. Or, you know, he might, at a moment, like he might have 10 million different things in his mind, and he is like, what do you think about, you know, what should we, and I can suggest something, and within the language of what we're doing. And so I think that, like, the question, you know, at the end of a job, like, I think that I don't care how long you've been in the business, you know, if it's 5 years, 10 years, 30 years or whatever, like when you finish a job, you know, there's a moment like you're like, oh, we've done that. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, you're going, I don't think I'll never work again, you know. And I think that everybody in the business goes through that, and then you get another job, and it's like you know, a cinematographer, Caleb Deschanel. I used to work for as a PA for a commercial company that he used to direct for, and I'd go into his office and, you know, I'd talk about light and everything. And the one thing that he always told me was the best place you want to be is in over your head, you know, and that's where you're truly learning. It's like, you know, when you're driving a car, you know, you're driving at, you know, 20 kilometers an hour, and it's like, oh, okay, you know, but if you're going 300 kilometers an hour, you're paying attention, you know. It's like, you know, it's like you're gonna, I just think that there's something about the thrill of, you know, really forcing yourself to, like, you know, it's, we're not saving lives, but the thing is, it's like we're doing something, you know, on a scale of working in this cohesive group where everybody has their role. And like, if you don't do your job, then it ripple effects in, you know, time, money, and all that stuff happen. You know, it's, you know, it affects everybody. And so if you come to work and you're playing your part, and, you know, the pressure is always immense, but like, you don't think about that. You just do your job. And it's like the scene in the end of The Unforgiven, you know, when the gunfight and everybody's just shooting all over the place. It's like, and Clint Eastwood's just going, and it's just one shot at a time. You know, you focus on that one thing, you know, and you just go to the next one. So, and you put it all together, and you have a movie at the end.
One hopes.
One. Well, it'll be a good movie or a bad movie. You know?
Hope someone's writing these down. Actually, really valuable quotes.
But again, and coming back to you, I mean, you have to at some point rely a little bit on your intuition as well, because there's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of pressure, and you're going very fast. And some people, they function very good under it. I'm for instance one that sometimes I have to rely on that intuition. You know, you have to get your adrenaline up to a certain level in order to sort of start, you know, firing ideas. You know, I always love that sort of druggy state of euphoria. You know, that's why it's so nice when you have a 12-hour day and you have a schedule and the sun is moving through the sky. You know, you get a little bit more panicky, and also even better, you get a little bit less precious. You know, preciousness can be a real killer. You know, like when you do a film, there's all these small moments, and you have to rely a little bit that sometimes you're less successful, sometimes you're more successful with that moment, sometimes you get that exactly the way you planned it, sometimes you get it almost there, and then you put it all together. You kind of read it, and in a holistic way, you kind of see, okay, there's an idea, and I've been trying to follow that as good as I could. And there, I think adrenaline, or at least some sort of a stress and momentum that gets you through the day, and just make sure you make your days, you know, it will slowly keep adding to the end result of your film, you know. It's never about micromanagement for me. It's never about, oh, if I don't do this exactly right, and then everything will fall apart like a card house. You know, you have to be a little bit more resilient, I think. You know, and a little bit more relaxed about it.
Compromise.
Well, compromise is a big word, but I just think that if you start to sit on your own shoulder, and everything you do has to pass that same sort of quality control that has very little to do what happens in front of you, but very much to do what happens in your head, I think you get stuck very easily. And you know, if you see filmmaking like a jam session with musicians, right? When you stand all on stage, you know, and you got a drummer and his drummer, and you're there playing another instrument, you just have to flow, you know, because if you don't, you know, the music stops. So you have to keep the music going, whatever you do.
Yeah. Another one to write down. Well, you mentioned music a lot. Are there any other forms of arts that you think inspire you a lot to keep doing your work? Maybe music or still photographers or painters that you...
Any art form. Literally any art form. I like the comparison with music a lot because to me, the way that I do my work, music is the best analogy. You know, I know that cinematographers endlessly keep talking about painting, right? Painting is the analogy to learn cinematography, and cinematographers, they always talk about the great painters and the way the light falls and everything. I understand it, and I also, my background is very much, Polish film school is a very classic, very sort of doctrinistic, strict film school in that way. It was all about art history and painting and frames and golden ratios and light, and it just never vibed with me. It was just never an analogy that I could find myself in, for me, it was always much more about jam session, music, flow, time, the timeline that goes. And whatever you do, that timeline keeps going anyway. And the only thing you can do is assert influence during, you can play a note like here, or you can play a note here, you can play a false note, but the timeline keeps going. And the power of your work is very much that whole piece of music in the end.
Beautifully put. Any more questions? In the back over there.
Should we just throw the mic?
Yeah. Practice our reflexes. Actually, one of our teachers sometimes does things like that. He'll throw a pen at us just to see if we're awake.
Yeah.
Hi. It's such an honor having you here and being able to ask you questions in person. I'm feeling super appreciative. And I wanted to know, actually my question is really related to what you said in one of the earliest questions, which is when you're shooting a scene that feels more intimate for a character, for example, where like a close-up of the character thinking about something or feeling some type of emotion, how do you feel and understand the level of closeness and immersion that you want to get at, and how do you recreate it with light and camera work in order to give shape to the scene?
Well, in a way, the truth is there's not so much to it, right? To be intimate or not intimate is very much in where you are with a camera, I think. And I think an audience or the audience is so well educated these days that an audience can instinctively feel where a camera is at. We can still think, we go on a longer lens, but we go on a tighter, we go on a longer lens, we go further away, we get the same close-up. That for an audience, that's exactly the same as going to a wider lens and go closer. But instinctively, even the most untrained audience can feel that distance instantaneously. So, if a camera is here, filming a close-up of you, or it's here, it's a big difference. And I think that audiences' experience is very different. So for me, to create intimacy is very much be intimate and put pressure on your actors. So with that IMAX camera over there, I would literally be like, the actor would be here. I would be here, and I would be breathing on that person, and my eyeball like here, and it's intimidating. But at the same time, the lens, the perspective that lens see. We all understand the proximity of the camera there. We all understand that we're in somebody's private bubble, Also the opposite. If we do close-ups with a long lens and we can shoot the most precious tight close-up where you can see the expression on anybody's face, but you are on the other side of the room, you feel that you're peeping on a person. You feel that you're not there, you're not participating, you're not in somebody's bubble, you're just sort of like a pervert sneakily looking at a person, and then you focus even on details while peeping on that person. So in that way, it's for me, it's very simple, of course. But then, of course, it becomes very much about the atmosphere around the camera and the strength of the acting itself and the tuning of those kind of things, or the way the camera moves around it, how that feels. I'm thinking a little bit now about Oppenheimer, because I've been talking about Oppenheimer a lot, and it is so much about being in somebody's personal space and bubble, and it was so much about really crawling. I mean, really wanted the feeling as like me as with the camera. I would just sort of step into his eyes, sometimes, and go in his head, and then turn back 180 degrees, look out of his eyes, and see the world how he's looking at. That was kind of the feeling that I wanted to the audience to feel there. So everything I did with that camera and with the closeness of it, I really tried to do that as much as possible.
It's crazy as well, because both options you just mentioned, both different types, that you can both make them feel complex and intimate. Because, for example, Swedish Love Story, the movie we're talking about,
it's a long lens.
It's a lot of long lens, and yet still we feel obviously peeping.
By the way, not always, but yes. Yeah. But I think the intimacy in a Swedish Love Story very much comes from the idea that you as a viewer, you're given the feeling that you're observing something that you're not really supposed to observe. It's very observing. It's very much fly on the wall kind of, and I think very much dependent on subject matter. It's a long lens very often can give you the feeling that you're being led into something secret. You're allowed to peep at something that is secret, and that gives you a very sort of candid and open image of what's happening. But I still think that you're participating in that secret. It's like a simple thing when you have a group of 3 people, and the camera's outside, and you look through this 2 people. They're out of focus on each side of the camera, and the person's in the middle, and they're sort of talking to the left person, right person, left person. You're looking outside into the group. Whereas when you are in the middle of it, and there's a person here, here, and here, and you get to film the face here, and then you have to turn around, face here, face here. At that moment, you're within the group. You're part of that little group. Sorry, maybe I should drink some water. Talking makes you really dry in the throat.
Hands, yeah, here we go. In blue.
Hi. In that regard, I'd like to ask you about your camera work in Interstellar, because in my opinion, it's the most visceral and emotional, in a good sense, movie of Christoper Nolan. And the interesting thing about this movie is that if you watch the movie without sound, it looks like it has been cut with an axe by Leo Smith.
Did you watch the movie without sound?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I do that many times. I'm going to tell you why. Yeah. So the thing is that without the music, which in this case is a perfect glue, you can see, you can feel the inner architecture of the movie, right? Mm. And when I'm telling you that this is the most emotional movie by Christoper Nolan, is because I believe because your camera work in that movie. And it's interesting because you at the beginning of this class, you mentioned your references or your inspirations, and you said you mentioned John Cassavetes, right? So in one of these sittings, I was watching the movie, and it was like, this looks like John Cassavetes' movies shot in space. Mm. I may be wrong, it's like kind of crazy, right? So that independent attitude, approach, bringing to in a big budget movie, But in somehow it makes sense because when you watch the movie without sounds, as I said, it looks like it was cut with an axe, like bam, 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 bam. It's so fucking violent. The editing is so violent. It's unbelievable. I mean, Nolan is maybe not the most subtle and more delicate filmmaker, right? But the camera work, somehow it's very coherent. You know, it works so well. I mean, and it has to do with what you were just saying. You know, about the way you position yourself as a cinematographer, actor, or player, right? So I like you to ask if you can elaborate on that camera work, because the scenes on the spacecraft, it has a lot of intimacy and a lot of emotional violence also. Thank you.
Thank you to start with. I see that as some sort of compliment. You know, when I started working with Chris, it was interesting because he had a whole history with another cinematographer, very good cinematographer, Wally Pfister. And at some point, I started working with him, and the first question that you ask yourself a little bit as a DP is, you know, what can I bring to the table that was different from, you know, what Wally had been doing with Chris before, you know, and I always thought that, you know, Chris and Wally's films, they were very formal in a way. They were very well made, very well crafted, but they had a formality to them. You know, they were sometimes a little too well crafted, maybe. You know what I mean? I just always had the feeling that the stories that Chris was telling, you know, and he tells them like a true British gentleman. There's a lot of restraint on, you know, subtle emotions, like a true Brit, you know, like oh well, you know,
almost like a sir.
Yeah, but there is rawness in him, and there is a very strong emotionality in him. It's just not like, you know, more, you know, Southern or Spanish. It's not on the end of the tongue, you know. It's not an extrovert thing. But I thought that I could play a little bit of a role there, and I always had the feeling that, you know, what we talked about before, a little bit less preciousness towards the approach of every close-up or every sequence, you know. Be a little rougher, you know, be a little slightly less controlled, or at least don't try to control everything, you know. That would help a little bit. As you see there, I really, for me, it was a big mission to get that camera on the shoulder, you know. Not necessarily because I love handheld, but in the context of this rigid space movie, to be there as a viewer and to introduce handheld, but on that gigantic canvas, that was like a mission for me. That I really wanted to see that. So that's why I'm all the time walking around with this mini bar on my shoulder, you know, pure that will to see within that reality as an eye, as a curious person, that, you know. And then there was another thing as well. That was that I started working a lot with my favorite lens builder, Dan Sasaki. You know, from my lower budget films before, like. I had this one lens that I just adored, which was a super speed 35mm lens, and I always loved that lens on the camera. It's a spherical lens. I loved that lens on the camera because it was sort of a standard, wide standard lens, but, you know, instead of like putting on longer lenses, you know, I could go much closer and I could go very close and still, you know, be able to focus there. And that lens also would open up to a 1.4. So I could even shoot in very subdued light situations. And that lens gave me a lot of freedom. But we wanted to shoot this on IMAX that doesn't have a lens like that, as well as on anamorphic. And so I asked Dan if he could make me an anamorphic lens that had very similar qualities, which means kind of the same field of view as the 35 millimeter. So he designed for me a 65 millimeter anamorphic that had close focus almost to the lens plane, that opened up to 2.0, and a lot of these close-ups I made with that lens, and I really fell in love with that lens, you know. So that absolutely gave some of that intimacy. Of course, also it's very difficult for, you know, people like Keith to pull focus on those kind of things, because the focal depth is so extremely short. But at the same time, with that same mentality of not being too precious about it, you know, we let things sometimes dive in and out of focus. And it's not because we sort of aesthetically want that, but that's just really the nature of shooting. Again, that philosophy of not being too precious about it, and that not preciousness kind of adding something to the whole picture of it, you know. You say Cassavetes, but I think Cassavetes is all about having some sort of a poetic vision and then just freaking go, you know. And not try to sort of plaster out everything or smooth out everything, but just live with your shortcomings and make the shortcomings part of yourself, of your language, you know. And that was very much for me the mentality I had on Interstellar, you know. It was such a rigid film. It was so rigid in its writing. It was so rigid in its sets, you know. Space, the big sets. I thought if we just, you know, are a little bit more brutal in it, a little bit more brutalistic, not too scared, you know, maybe we can infuse some more life into this.
I think it's a great approach, and I'm happy Nolan embraced it, because
and by the way, he embraces it more than any of us, you know. He's fearless in that way, and he's in that way a great director. That he is never shying away to find humanity in things when it's possible. He's never a person that wants to milk it out artificially, but he's always a person that is so ready to take risks that would, would be very not obvious for a big production like this, you know. He would be the first one to suggest, oh, let's just shoot this in a close-up and the rest happens out of focus, and it doesn't matter if you have 100 or 1,000 extras and gigantic explosions or stuff. But he's all about the story and the persons and the people, and you know. Yeah.
As you said, there are a couple of out of focus moments. So very well done, Keith.
Well, I didn't do Interstellar.
Oh, cool. My bad.
But there's even more out of focus moments in no.
Not by my design.
Yeah. You know, it's very interesting because if you work with a lot of focus pullers, you talk about you can start talking about a hit rate, which basically means if you work in an impossible focus scenario where you're wide open and I'm literally, there's no marks on the floor, the actors all over the place, and I'm all the time like doing this, right? And then, you know, it's up to Keith to feel it out, also like a musician, you know, and to follow it. And hit rate is how often can you keep things in focus. And I haven't met anybody that has a higher hit rate than Keith. Nevertheless, when you watch Oppenheimer, there's moments that are out of focus, but these are in so challenging situations that, you know, I mean, let me say it like this. If I would have done Oppenheimer with any other focus puller than Keith, so much more of the film would have been out of focus.
That Keith intuition. Lucia?
Hi. Do you hear me? Yes, okay. So I've got two questions, one for Hoyte and one for Keith. And I'm going to start with Keith. So you mentioned that you consider yourself a shy person. And I was wondering if you think that affected you somehow when you started, not so much now, because I feel like if you work with a team that you know, sorry, that shyness might, go away. But I feel like when you start your journey in the film industry, everything is so uncertain and imposing, and being a shy person, that might feel even more imposing. I don't know. I was wondering if you have any advice for shy people who are trying to make their way up there. I don't know. Yeah.
I think the most important thing, it was, we were having breakfast this morning, and we was talking with Hoyte's brother and sister, and we were talking about me in front of people, and my shyness. And I think that the most important thing, that is to get out of your own head. That's the most important thing. I think that and that's easier said than done. And I think that being in a technical field like a camera, because it's if you years ago when people, before they diagnosed people with Asperger's, people, oh, he's just shy, and they're socially awkward, and they are very mechanically, and they would delve into the technical things. And I think that with shyness, it's the thing that I love about being a first assistant is that it forces me to be, I can't hide behind, the techniques of the camera, because I'm considered a department head. It's like I'm a manager of gear and people, and so when I talk to the director, ask me a question, I have to, in front of everybody, have a plan. It's there's times that Chris, he will meet with all the department heads, and we have these big stunts and everything, and he wants to know what our plan is. And so I might be standing in front of 100 people and saying this is what the camera department's plan is based on the information I have. It's believe in yourself, learn your foundational skills. I think that if you're an honest, my approach in life is I'm always honest. I try to live a life of truth. And so, Hollywood is everybody's telling a tale or two. And I think that it's easier for me if I tell the truth, then I don't have to worry about fabricating a lie and keeping it going. And so, true to myself, true to my relationships in life, I feel believe in self-belief, educating myself, putting myself in a situation where if I don't know something, I know that I have the skills to learn it, or I'm surrounded by a group of people that if I don't know it, I can ask, and I can not afraid to say I don't know something, and I can just say, hey, Emily, how do you do this? And she does it, And so I don't know if I helped, or I just, yeah.
Thank you.
Elaborating on that, I just don't believe that there's one sort of character feature in people that make you good to do a certain job, right, better than others. I think my career went shitty when I thought that I had to behave a certain way as a DP, For instance, that you always have to be sure of yourself, you have to tell everybody, things and so on. I think the moment that you sort of accept that you are either a shy person, or you're a clown, or you're this, or you're that, but you're yourself, that people get affected by that more, because they feel that you're not bullshitting and you're just yourself. And I think it's much easier to listen to a person than to a pretend person.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Yes. Okay. My question for you was more on the technical side, I think. And I was wondering if there's like any specific camera or lenses that you like to work with, or it depends. So yeah.
I mean, it always depends on your objective, I suppose. You know, I mean, right now we're shooting on 35 millimeter. There's super nice things with that. You know, sometimes you work with sync sound and you don't do high speed, so you want a camera that is small and ergonomic. And then lenses is a whole different thing. You know, you always end up working with different lenses that can do different things, or see things differently, or have slightly different artifacts. Or, you know, we have some close-up lenses that are they look very good close-up, but they don't look very good for wide-angle lenses. So we have a special lens, the same focal length that is good for wide-angle lenses. I do love the big format, you know. I do love IMAX. I do love very much what it represents and what it gives us as an audience. My sort of love affair with IMAX and the big format has come very much about my realization about framing and viscerality of a theatrical experience. More and more, I kind of started to fall in love with that idea that if you do things right and if you listen very much to the way your audience perceives a film and start asserting influence on that, you know, the more sort of control you have to the level of immersion that you can get your audience into, you know. Like I told you before, I came from the Polish film school where, you know, we had endless lessons about framing, you know, and about the golden ratio and about, you know, how to compose and composition, etc., etc. More and more, I become some sort of a nihilist about framing, or the whole concept of a frame itself. There's something banal with that, you know, because a frame ultimately tells you, okay, I'm a filmmaker, this is reality, and I'm going to draw a box around this, and then this little slice of reality I'm going to present to you. And that's kind of what a frame does, right? And you can clean up that frame. You can say, I go a little bit to the left, and then I put a lot of negative space on the left, and this has this and this and this and this meaning. And if I put two people at the sides of the frame, or, you know, if I put one face poking in, and then there's a lot of negative space there, and then I put a little pole here, you know, it all makes sense in a way, in a painteresque way. But I more and more start to think, or when I see that in my own work and I see my own work back, I very much get sort of confronted with my own sort of banal thought about it. So more and more, I start to believe in that idea, like, if you really want to do things right, you know, you want frames to be non-existent, you know, you want, as an audience, or as a filmmaker, you want to make a handshake with your audience and pull your audience into a reality that you're yourself poking into. So that's one of the reasons I start falling in love with IMAX, because IMAX works very much if you're very true to the way that an audience perceives the film. Framing doesn't really exist. You sit so close to the screen that you don't really know where your frame ends and where your frame starts, as well as when you offset your compositions, sort of the IMAX effect disappears. So suddenly you become a center puncher. You start punching things in the center, and then from cut to cut to cut, your focus is always in the center of the frame, and everything on the left side of your frame and on the right side of the frame becomes sort of peripheral vision. It becomes atmosphere, it becomes smell, it becomes mood. And your framing is starting to happen much more in a three-dimensional space, you know, in depth. I like that very much. I really start to dislike every time when I see a frame. I start to dislike noticing that there's a frame or that there's like even a banal idea of a frame. You know, it's things like I compose something. There's a ball in the right corner of the frame. And, you know, if you work with an operator, you notice they walk into the set and they, you know, your frame is here. And it's just at the edge of the frame. And the ADD of the cinematographer and the camera operator is like, oh, I push it away. So now we have a little space in between. That's much more neat, right? But today I'm like, this is the frame. And I'm like, I let it poke half out, you know. It doesn't make sense as a frame. But it does tell you, oh, it's not about the frame. It's about the life that is outside the frame as well. You know, it's not about my particular vision alone, but it's also about the reality that you're actually filming. And that is something that why I really started to gravitating more towards IMAX in the big format, because that's really you know, sort of forces you thinking about this in a different way. I'm still sort of grinding over it and thinking about it, and etc., etc. But today, I have to say, when I see a well-composed shot, right? Like I saw it the other day. I'm not calling any names, but it's a beautiful landscape. It's like kind of a Lawrence of Arabia landscape, and then exactly at 3/4 of the frame, there's a little tiny group of people, you know, and they're offset, like the golden ratio there, and the right side offset. And I look at it, you see it in the screen, and you can see, oh, that's such a beautiful, neat composition. Could have been a painting, could have been a photograph. The only thing that I have nowadays is like, oh, fuck, I want to center punch those people, for fuck's sake, you know? Because I don't understand it. I don't understand it on an intuitive level. I think it's some kind of a neat freakery that I don't have anything with when you talk about making movies that you really have to sort of get into, engage with, and so on. I'm on this journey where I try to convince myself that it's not about being neat, and a frame is not something that you have to clean like a cleaning lady. You know, it's something that it's just a little representation of everything that happens also beyond, you know.
While on the topic of framing, you're known for usually operating your own films. What do you think this adds for you personally to the process, and how does it feel also when you let go of this? Because for The Fighter, for example, you worked with an operator. How does that feel to you? Does you feel that it adds something as well, or are you more?
It's very dependent on director and operator, of course. You know, I love operating myself, you know, in the constellation of working with the right kind of people. I mean, to be candid, or to speak candidly, when I did The Fighter, I knew it was going to be a very, very challenging film, you know, and also the way that David, the director, would work with an operator, you know. I mean, an operator might as well have a handle on his back, and he would just sort of move people around. And I thought, as a cinematographer, you know, somebody that is supposed to have some sort of holistic view, I mean, you better don't get into that position, because, you know, then the other side of what you're trying to do, you kind of lose credibility, and you just become a tool. So I just felt it was much more important to sit next to him and listen to what he had to say, and let him push down and have a more holistic overview of it. Whereas where you work with Chris, the sets are so intimate, you know, and there's so little people around the camera, and it's so much about looking through that viewfinder, feeling that reality, and moving the camera through that, you know. You know, an operator would get another person there into that intimate circle with its own sort of needs and artistic views. So what we try to, we all the time try to strip it down, make it simpler, make it more pure and more direct. Also, we don't really work with video assist. So for Chris to have that communication with me while I'm operating the camera is much purer, much cleaner. So in that way, it totally makes sense for me to do it myself. Now, I did one other film with an operator, which was Spectre. I worked with one of the best operators in in Hollywood, Lucas. And I did that just because when I started that film, I just thought it was overwhelmingly much stuff for my experience level, you know. It was big stunts, and we were pre-lighting sets and so on. And I just was so afraid that you know, when I was operating, I could not handle the whole thing. I mean, in retrospect, I think I maybe made the wrong choice. You know, I should have operated it.
You're scared of losing sight of the big picture.
What?
Were you a little bit scared of losing sight of the big picture? Like,
well, I mean, in that film, I was scared that I would lose the big picture, that I couldn't handle, like operating at the same as handling the big things. But I think kind of the opposite happens. You know, just by not operating, I suddenly subjected myself to somebody else's taste. You know, and then everything in that section was becomes an extra discussion, and I think it would have been much easier for me to just do it.
Right.
Not taking away that Lucas is an extremely good operator, you know, with an extremely good taste, but always a different taste, you know, and always different choices.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. This is going to be, one over there.
Just keep going. I don't mind.
Okay, well.
Whatever you want to know, please.
Hi, guys. Joel, te voy a pedir que me traduzcas porque así me la formulo bien. Es una pregunta sobre Nope. Sí, la pregunta es ¿de quién es la idea de usar una cámara de infrarrojos y si fue muy complicado el hecho de convencer a la producción para usar un trasto de 3D, o sea, para tener dos cámaras a la vez? Y un poco una pregunta para Kit, en este aspecto, es ¿cómo fue trabajar con dos cámaras a la vez para esta película?
Oh, his question is about Nope, and he wants to know what where the idea came from for using infrared. If it was your idea, if it was very hard to convince production to do so, and of course for Keith, the workflow to work with the double camera system thing. So how was that?
The idea came from an idea I had already years before at Astra. There I started playing with it, and I don't know how I think I came up with the idea that we were so much looking at avant-garde film and so on, and when we were preparing that film, nothing was kind of crazy enough, and I looked at a lot of photos, and everything wanted to be quite expressionistic, but we had to shoot the lunar surface. You know, and then, you know, we make some sort of an assessment of what a lunar surface is, and you know, the lack of atmosphere on the lunar surface is very evident. You know, there is no atmosphere, which basically means there's no dispersion of light. It's pure hard light that gets reflected, but your sky is black. You know, because there's nothing to reflect that sky back into, and there we kind of figured out. And I did that. I figured it out a little bit from looking a lot at stills, but that bandwidth, that narrow bandwidth of infrared light, is something that doesn't reflect back in such huge amounts in the atmosphere, in the sky, and you can filter that out very, very easily. So we found out that by just shooting infrared, we could get during the day very much a relatively same feeling as you know, direct sunlight, but with a lack of atmosphere. So that enabled us to shoot the lunar surface in a desert during the day and get a very similar character. Now the only problem was infrared is such a narrow bandwidth, there's no color. So So I thought, what if we can just sort of introduce color to this, you know? So I started playing with an old decommissioned 3D rig. And a 3D rig, basically, it's a mirror, halfway through mirror. And one camera shoots here and the other one shoots in the mirror. And so you can align those lenses up. It's very hard to align those lenses up. These are built so you can get a little parallax. But if you want to put those lenses together, it gets very, very difficult because you have to really align them very precisely. Because the moment that you don't align them precisely, yeah, you have a perfectly alignment at a certain distance, but when people start moving closer to the camera, they separate again. So we found a way. We sent our one of the first things we sent our second AC. We sent to IKEA. And he bought this picture frames that we then put with wool. We put crosses through it and then lined them up after each other. And we would shoot a laser to the center, and this would help us aligning those cameras. And somehow, weirdly enough, that really helped us. And we could shoot shots on location, on set, during the day that looked already out of the DIT with his limited possibilities. It looked like we were on the surface of the moon. So that's kind of where we really gotten enthusiastic. Now for Nope, we went on a scout, and Jordan and I we drove to the valley at night. And we got out of the car, and the headlights were in the car, you know, and we walked out of the car, and suddenly the car headlights went out. And so it's Jordan and I, we walk away in pure darkness. And as we were talking, our pupils started dilating and opening up, and suddenly we both started to see the mountain ridges, the details on the mountain. They very slowly revealed themselves to us. And so suddenly we're standing in absolute darkness, but we can see the vastness of the valley. We can see the details in the sky. We saw the orange glow from the city. And we were looking at each other, we said, oh, fuck, wouldn't it be beautiful if we can get that feeling on film, you know? So then I at some point told him, well, I've experimented with this technique at some point on Ad Astra. And so I started doing tests with these things, you know. Keith, of course, like, okay, there we go again. But this time we were at another rental house, right? We were at Panavision. And we have Dan Sasaki, the guy that I always use for my lenses. So he built us a device with a laser that he could put in both cameras. This time we were shooting 70 millimeter or 65 millimeter, and the Alexa 65. We put them together. He built a laser device that you put in both mounts of the camera that could, you know, make the alignment much easier. So in that way, it started to be slightly easier for us. And then we did the same kind of experimentation, but this time with night, with creating night, and that's kind of how we gotten forward. And then there's a lot of other technical problems that come, like syncing these cameras up and all this kind of stuff. Take it away, Keith.
on Ad Astra, like you know, he came up with this idea, and then we started, like, it was like every time we touched this, you know, we learned something new. Like the alignment was important, and then we learned that you know, it's like focus was on the infrared spectrum is different focus in the normal spectrum. So we had to adjust the lenses to that wavelength and to make sure that the lenses focus at the same distance. We were able to use two ARRI cameras, Alexa 4.3 and a 4.35. So the cameras, they kind of spoke electronically, they spoke the same language. When we went to large format and we're using the Alexa 65 and the Panavision System 65, you know, those don't speak to each other. So there was like a global coming together with Panavision and ARRI to basically Ari was writing code to so the cameras could talk to the Panavision. Panavision was doing the same thing, so we were able to get the cameras to sync up.
Kind of like making the two enemies in the world speak together, meet up with each other.
Yeah, so it was like
conference.
Yeah, so it was going out the door. We got that together, but like when we did Ad Astra, we knew proof of concept. We knew that it would work, and you know, before we even started principal on Ad Astra, we knew that we had a good solid workflow to go out into the world and shoot. We had a dependable, we had a repeatable, and we had a pretty efficient system. On Nope, we just ramped it up a little bit better because you know, we were able to make it super efficient, where you know, we would put it on an arm car, and then we'd take it, would yank off the 172-pound device, and we'd put it on a dolly, and we'd do a scene with a dolly. Then we'd take that same device and we could put it on a crane. And so, you know, it was just by our testing and shooting, and you know, like one of my biggest jobs is to devise a plan that we can move quickly and efficiently. So my team can, you know, give him and the director what they want in a reasonable amount of time. So on Nope, I don't think it was, once we got through the technical issues, it was, you know, shooting as normal. Like, and that's, you know, with the IMAX and large format, like, you know, most of the time, you know, it's like we're using an Alexa or, you know, any other small camera. You know, we put them in different spots, and, you know, it's just, there's no hindrance with the mediums that we use.
There's an important thing in there that is any sort of plan you devise, anything you do, you have to get the director on board, you know. The director is your biggest advocate for whatever, you know. If you together and the director want something, it's a fight that you can win. If you don't have a director on board, there's no use to fight for it. But in the case of Nope, you know, my first tests were all about making Jordan enthusiastic for it, you know, and giving him the idea that he was going to get something that nobody has gotten. And the moment that I presented that to him, you know, he became the biggest advocate for it. And when he's the biggest advocate for it, suddenly it became easy to convince Universal for it. You know, he's sold it in, you know, for us, for our sake. So it's super important to as a DP to make sure that your director is on the same train as you are.
Yeah, like going back to Ad Astra, like the same thing. It was like, you know, when we were going through all these tests, people were going, why? And like in the rental house, and assistants and people, well, why are you going through all this trouble? And then you look at the footage and you go, oh, that's why. And then, you know, once James Gray saw that, you know, he was on board. And then with Nope, it was the same thing. Like it's, you know, we had, you know, producers scratching their heads going, you know, and it's like, and all they could see is the money. And then, you know, and then once we, you know, you saw the footage, and it's like,
I mean, literally when we did the footage for the first time in a desert, and our DIT just turned his knobs and stuff, and we and he's there under a tent, and it's like burning sun outside. And we have two astronauts walking in bright daylight in suits, sweating out, and they're coming towards the camera like this, and it freaking looked like they were on the moon without any CG. I mean, James just started laughing hysterically, remember?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it was super cool.
Yeah. How does working with a small diesel engine sound-wise affect your ability to work? Is it disturbing in any way, or did you imagine you had to get used to it at first? I mean, even for an actor to work intimate scenes, if suddenly there's a machine going off, how does that affect both of your abilities to work on set?
I mean, it's really a nuisance, and it's a lot of noise. But you know what you're going to get afterwards. And so, you know, the ways towards it really justifies it a little bit. And the moment that you see dailies for the first time, you understand why this is important to do it like that. We have already, since years, we are fighting to get the sound down, and we even created a blimp for it and so on, that works in some situations, some doesn't. And the problem was it's a little too long lenses that we needed for it. We are all the time engineering to get that sound down. But yet still we keep using that thing. It's just because the result is so much justification for that. But yes, it's a nuisance. And it's also, it's logic, you know, it's like the idea, I mean, an IMAX frame is a 70 millimeter film, 15 perfs long. That is one frame of IMAX. So it's this big. So that camera pulls these big frames 24 times per second through that machine. So it's a lot of force. It's a lot of inertia. It's very powerful. And you don't necessarily feel it when you start walking, but it's a very big motor. But when you really feel it is when you jam, you know, like you're pulling these big frames, and it's not just that it just flows through it, but it puts a frame in front of the gate, next frame, next frame, next frame, next frame, next frame, 24 times a second. So you feel the vibration, you feel the power. But then when you jam, you know, and you suddenly put the handbrake on this, it feels like a jolt, you know. It's like a real physical, somebody just jolts the camera, as well as the sound. It's like, you know, an F-16 airplane is like crashing into your ear, you know. So it's always like, oh, you know. And then Keith has to take it off my shoulder. Ryan takes it off my shoulder, puts it there. Keith opens it, and sometimes, literally with pliers and a screwdriver or a chisel, he has to like hammer out the film that is compacted, like you know, with a lot of power. And then, you know, to undo that, that's a lot of work. But it's clumsy, but it's at the same time, it's an extreme precision machine. It's the precision and the stability of it is incredible when you think about the inertia and the forces on it. And you see it on the screen, and in the screen you don't hear a projector. You suddenly see it projected, like a one-on-one contact print projected on the screen, and you just understand, holy shit, this is incredible, you know?
You view your dailies on print, right?
We project, we always print dailies. The 65 millimeter we project and we see it on set, or we have a trailer with us, or we have a little classroom that we turn into a projection room. The IMAX, you cannot see projected, because to move a projector around is just highly impractical. A projector is like, it's way too big to travel around the world. But what we do is we print them to 35 millimeter. We make reduction prints of it. And those 35 millimeter prints we see, because then you can still see the sharpness and the exposure and so on very, very nicely. So yeah, we watch, and otherwise we watch everything that we shoot, we watch projected on film. It's kind of the only way to do it if you really want to make a judgment about the sharpness and the way it works.
We had a question over here.
Going back to what you said about IMAX being so immersive, of course it will also be shown in TVs and other places where it cannot be projected as IMAX itself. So I wanted to ask about the post-production process of like reframing and creating different aspect ratios. Is it something you do it yourself, or do they just like chop it off and just send it out like that?
No, we try to curate it pretty good, but it's kind of a trickle down effect, right? So we make our on Oppenheimer, we have our two master versions that we love. One is the analog IMAX print, and one is the 65 millimeter print. The IMAX print exists out of the shots that we originally shot in IMAX that are put into the real, you know, 1:1. It's like the full frame IMAX 1:143 aspect ratio, and the 65 millimeter. And the 65 millimeter is a blow up, also in its original framing. So full negative you get there. So when you watch it in an IMAX theater, you see the IMAX and you see when we shot it on 65, you know. And we use a lot of sort of trickery to let those switches be smooth, in-camera trickery. Like, for instance, you know, if you shoot inside a car, you know, the roof of the car is dark regardless, and then you cut outside to IMAX. I mean, there's a lot of those kind of, or cuts in from one scene to another, you know, where you can sort of hide it a little bit. But that becomes our master version, and that's a fully analog grade on that, and it's a print. And then we have the 65 millimeter, which is the same principle, but everything is the 1:1 ratio. And then whenever IMAXs come up, then you have to center crop it. When I shoot, there's a center frame lines. So when we shoot, I'm aware where the 65 millimeter frame lines are, and so I'm always safe holding for that 65 millimeter. So if you just consistently cut the top and the bottom off, you're getting the right frames for the 65 millimeter 5 per version. And then, of course, you got all the other formats that derive from that. We love our analog grade so much that when we go and create a DCP, the digital grade, what we do is we project the analog grade, and on the right side we have our DCP picture, and we model our DCP fully from the analog grade. So once we have graded the film analog, we're not creating the look anymore. The look is what is given to us by the analog grade. And then, of course, there's a lot of center crops that go to 240, or, you know, analog 35 millimeter we do as well, you know. But these ones are all derived from it. Now, my belief, and I don't think it's just a belief, but it's a fact, is that if your ground resolution or your ground material is of high resolution, that'll trickle down in the lower resolutions as well. If you shoot a film on 8K or on 12K, it will look much better once you're down at a 2K or 4K print than if you would have originated in 4K and you see it then. So for me, that's very evident. So the higher and the more pedantic you hold on to your fullest resolution for your master, that'll all trickle down into your derived versions lower down the line as well.
Thank you. Can you possibly take us a little bit through your post-production process? Because you just talked that usually your analog grade is the thing you guys go with. So how does this usually go for you? You send the timings to the lab and you get results back, and
you know, when you're sending your materials to the lab will make you they call it a one light, but in fact it's a color timer that sits there, looks at the negative on her table, you know, and then punches in numbers, right? She literally decides how much yellow, how much red, you know, in units of points, you know, like she you know, and then you get your lab numbers back that represent how much yellow, green, and red you've been adding to your stock. And from those lab numbers, you can kind of interpret how much is added and what's originally on your negative. But when you start going into post, what happens is your negative get cut. You know, you cut. You know, after it comes out of the Avid, they cut the negative together, um, uh, and that'll become your master reel from which you grade from, and then you go and sit in a cinema, you know, with your color grader, and you look at the first print, the first work print, and then that work print has its own numbers, and then you start calling it out. You watch it in real time. You say, okay, this needs more magenta, or this needs more green. This needs to go down in density a little bit. This has to go up in density. And that's what you basically do. So you're grading your film in real time. Your reel is playing, and you're just sort of calling out numbers. You say 3 points more green, or 3 points less green, or add a little bit of red, you know. So you're watching your film in real time, and then she goes back, punches in those numbers, and then you come back a day later, and you watch a new reel, you know. And that's how it goes. And I love that way of grading, because opposed to sitting in a DI where you just sort of you grade, you put some power windows over there, you move on to your next shot, and very often you're kind of grading still shots. And then at the end you'll play it back, and then you realize this doesn't make sense, you know. It made sense when we were watching a still, but like when it all's moving forward in a flow, it doesn't make sense. And then you change it again, and you change it again. Whereas with an analog grade, you're sitting in the cinema, and you're watching your film real time playing, and that's how you grade, you know, on your real time film in a way.
Any questions before we end? Yeah, one more question over here.
I want to ask you if you can give us some advice from us. Like we are students of.
You want to say it in Spanish?
Sí, better. Yes.
Some advice to make your career glorious.
No. I say it in Spanish, it's more easy for me. Digo que si nos puede dar un consejo para ser o para llegar al mundo de la dirección de la fotografía, o para
entrar al mundo laboral.
Sí, o para sí.
Well, he's looking for a piece of advice to enter our world, to get started in the business of cinematography. To get there, sometimes students are quite nervous getting out of film school. Okay, now I'm going back to McDonald's. So I think his question goes along those lines, to any piece of advice to get there.
Well, I do not necessarily think I'm in a good position to give advice on that, because for me personally, it took a long time. And a lot of people I know, it doesn't take a long time. Where I kind of made the mistake, I think, is I went to Polish film school. I dropped out after the third year, I think, or something. And I went to Holland, and I thought, okay, now I'm going to visit everybody, and I'm going to tell them, hey, I'm here. And I went to the Polish film school, and I thought, everybody's going to love it, you know, that I went to Polish film school, you know, super artsy school, very original and all that stuff. I came to Holland and nobody was interested, you know. You know, I had problems working, and then some point somebody gave me a job as a second ACer, as a clapper loader. I was like, yes, I was so happy. And I worked on that production, and I was horrible at it. I was really terrible at it. I didn't feel good about it. I was like clumsy, you know. I felt insecure. I felt like it was not a place where I should be, you know. It just didn't fit me. It really didn't fit me. But everybody had always told me, oh, you start under the ladder and then you climb yourself up. But I very quickly realized that's a great theory, but it only works if you're actually good at what you do under at the start of the ladder, and I wasn't. So I had to tell myself at some point, you just have to start seeing yourself as a cinematographer. So I did. I said, I'm a cinematographer, and that's the work I'm going to do. which was followed up by 6 years of unemployment, sitting in my underwear on the couch, smoking a lot of cigarettes, you know. It took a long time, but that was also because I was clumsy with myself. I didn't really know what to do with myself, and so on. When I started working at some point, finally, that was around. Was very lucky because a big mentor of mine gave me a little trainee job. I could hang around, I could look at him, and I saw him working, and it was for me a very big sort of eye-opener, because what he did, and something that I really needed, was some sort of a demystification of the job, you know. When you're in film school, and for me, always there had to be some sort of magic, and I always thought I need to be a Superman in order to do this job. And there's all these cinematographers out there with their great names, and you know, you have to earn that. And then with him on the set, I literally saw a human being that was just sort of struggling with lights and sort of making decisions on the fly, and sometimes going with things, and sometimes compromising a little bit. But I also saw it's not like this kind of crazy artistic process of a master. It's just a guy trying, you know, getting to set in the morning, you know, drinking a cup of coffee and trying to make the best out of the day, you know. And his quality, I slowly started learning, comes really from the sum of all those tiny decisions that he makes through all these days, you know, and through all these moods. So that was in a way a very big eye opener for me. But I do regret a little bit that I didn't earlier on was a little bit more relaxed about it, you know, that I just had to do a lot, and you sometimes you just have to sort of tell yourself to go out there and just do certain things, and do them half-heartedly, or do them a little bit worse, not be too precious all the time. Not everything you have to do has to be a masterpiece, but it also serves a purpose along the way, you know. You have to learn, and the only way to learn is to just keep sort of, keep making mistakes at the time that you can still make some mistakes, you know. Don't try to make your masterpiece. Do that in 50 years, you know. It's like, be a little relaxed and take a breather, and don't be too precious, for sure.
Thank you. Well, I think a good way to end it is, as Nolan probably would say, is there any reason to do another one?
He says, that'll do us.
Yeah, that'll do us.
That'll do us. Thank you very much, both of you.
I brought some film strips, but I'm not sure if we have film strips for everybody. But maybe I thought if we don't have, we should just cut them in two. Then then there will be enough for everybody. Do we have a pair of scissors? If you want,
we can get a pair of scissors.
Huh?
In the meanwhile, we have something for you too.
Where's my jacket?
Yeah, we're bringing them.
Scissors are on the way.
Anyone?
Okay, you're just gonna go slowly, one by one. In the meanwhile, I would like to remind everyone that we're gonna be seeing Tenet in 70 millimeters this afternoon in Phenomena. You still have entrances available upstairs at half price, so I hope we can see you there. And we also have two presents for you. We have a presents for either one of you. It's a book of a local photographer when he traveled around Spain, capturing images of the whole of Spain.
Everybody sign this for me, please.
Wow. Well, now we need scissors and a pen. There we are, scissors. Okay, one of the two.
If you guys sign it, then I'll give you a film strips.
Yes, one. Okay, well, we'll do one by one.
Here. There's a lot of empty spaces. That's great. Let the students sign it.